Welcome back to Session 2. Ideology. Defined here as institutional norms, ideology is often strengthened by society's narratives, shaping our professional values, ideas and practice. Some beliefs we might be aware of, having encountered them as barriers in our learning. Others may be so deeply buried, we rarely question them. Storytelling. In conversation, those labelled are often assumed to be less competent learners, a belief that crystallizes as an unacknowledged idea that bottom sets require less attention, rather than more thought, time and energy. Ultimately, the grading learners by sets becomes the unchallenged idea. The hidden assumption being that those labelled should be treated differently. The language of special. In textual and conversational worlds, the words vulnerable, needy, special and differently abled are often used to describe those labelled. So creating the belief, if not the idea, that it's the learner who has needs, not the educational support that is needed. This reinforces the idea some learners have deficiencies that stop them learning the right way. It's not our thinking, but our language, in as these seemingly inconsequential words, that leads to negative assumptions about labelled learners. Ableism. When written into guidance, policy and strategy, the false assumptions derived from wording become apparent, not as a caricature so much, but as stereotypes in a narrative of typical. Those labelled become a group of outsiders, forgotten altogether outside special educational needs literature. That's to say most will forget to think of labelled learners as 1 or 2 in 10 within each classroom, overall a sizable population entitled to parity. The reaction to which is that the labelled are isolated individuals needing help, or needing to get off their backside, because they do not keep up, or overcome the barriers faced by those who succeed despite the system. Reinforced by specialist disciplines, a cycle of rejection and ignorance institutionalizes testimonial injustice in research evidence, the very knowledge that informs professionalism. Thus misrepresented, labelled learners are silenced by privileged writers in the storytelling of education, the telling of school practice, and the history of education. These remain devoid of the voices of those refused participation within the institution. Organizational and institutional discrimination. While prejudice leads to bias at the individual level, systemic discrimination needs a definition of its own. One that fully articulates the specific characteristics of those labelled as a specifically marginalized, as a disadvantaged group. While schools need to be a safe space to explore and theorize what it means to be othered and different in an environment which is usually seen as privileged. Yet where many feel they can't express their needs. Within academia, where perfectionism, productivity and excellence are accepted and therefore individuals may not necessarily be able to question these ideas. Oppression. Recognizing different levels of ableism in classrooms, schools, and education. Prejudice, victimization or disability hate crime, atypical behavior extended towards those labelled. The negative feelings, attitudes or behavior, often fueling a prejudice that is based on unchallenged assumption, or unconscious bias, belief that the other is less deserving of respect. Systemic or institutional discrimination, the unfair disadvantage created by ways of working and or internal barriers that lead to ongoing hindrance or restricted opportunity for those labelled. Social inequality, local culture, affecting organizational narratives where the representation those labelled feed the belief mentioned previously. These are generally so widespread in society they escape direct notice as ableist. Inclusion. Chosen by disabled people, activists within groups including disability studies, the word inclusion was specifically chosen to articulate belonging, unlike integration and mainstreaming which imply the need of those labelled to fit in. To be included in the fullest sense, education, not school practice, needs to change to enable the fullest participation of every possible learner. This articulation also disrupts a belief in a them and us continuum, by proposing an opposition to the implied acceptance of conditionality in existing vocabularies. Disabled activists saw these options as different forms of institutionalization, entrenched by the language of disciplines describing learners as special. Viewed as an alternative, inclusion is a possible North Star, a vision, not a reality. Therefore, while inclusive practice exists, inclusion is not a currently available option, because current alternatives only offer the unsatisfactory limitations imposed by existing classroom and school variation. Which means learners and their families cannot opt for a local school free of prejudice, discrimination, and inequality. Because no school space is free of ableism, sexism, racism, classism, homophobia, religious intolerance, and expectation in terms of family choices. Able privilege. Not the luxury of one identity, but the advantage of not having to stand against the expected norm. In school culture, where variation is an anomaly rather than a difference that is planned for. Belonging, therefore, is always jeopardized by culture. In critical disability studies, able privilege was first referred to as hearing privilege, not to describe being deaf, but to highlight the privilege of those not facing autism. The privilege of not being disadvantaged in a hearing society, a world that denies sign, BSL, as a language. Now think of the impact of Rosie's presence on Strictly, with the 488% rise in searches for learning sign language on Google. The notion of able as a norm, not other, defines the disadvantage the group faces, not their identity. As a concept, it is the privilege that is unearned, as it is afforded to those who not need to prove their humanity repeatedly. Able privilege, relative to non-disabled people, is not having to face ableism by reason of difference. A learner, therefore, need not identify for others to articulate the characteristic discrimination, ableism, many are subject to. The discrimination and inequality imposed on the labelled school population more widely, it is equivalent to the sexism women experience, a disadvantage that impacts on them negatively, as a characteristic myriad of setbacks. In gender terms, there's a difference between misogyny and patriarchy in the language of feminism, that writers on matters of disability equality have yet to name. Currently, there is a dearth of disability-specific terminology to describe with nuance in identity, prejudice, impairment, discrimination, and inequality. Misrepresentation. People trust their personal experience rather than attempting to address their assumptions with research evidence or working wisdom. Their own voice is louder than the alternatives offered by disabled people, but the ideas imposed by society more widely. Ableism is written into organizational accounts, in documents such as research, reviews, and textbooks, as many writers fail to name the negative impact of schooling on the labelled population. Our textual world fails to articulate an opposition to the institutional discrimination within education or inequality in society more widely. The very phrase special educational needs creates a space in which we can cast out those we find ourselves unwilling to teach. Ironically, the phrase was introduced to get away from diagnosis, by putting emphasis on the support being special, not the learner. Like so many disciplines, education has sidelined disability as a separate body of knowledge. Labeling learners then allows us to speak of them as outsiders in a narrative about attainment, achievement, and success, where those entitled to support become those who threaten higher outcomes. Think of leveling up currently. Questions for research. What are the stereotypes of labelled learners? How do these impact on learners? How do these impact on teachers? What emotions do they cause? How does this impact on practice, school organisation, and policy? Compare your responses with my story earlier.